Seja muito bem-vindo ao Gregários Cycling Podcast. Eu sou o Leandro Bittar e essas são as poucas palavras em português que você vai ouvir nesse episódio. Eu, o Álvaro Pacheco e o Nicolas Sessler tivemos a oportunidade de conversar com o CEO, com o fundador da série Gran Fondo Nova York, o Uli Fluhme, uma conversa em inglês. Amanhã, nessa sexta-feira, estreia um episódio, o Gran Fondo Nova York Bento Gonçalves, onde a gente vai se dedicar a falar sobre a prova que volta ao Brasil, agora no Rio Grande do Sul. A gente vai falar do percurso, da expectativa, da organização, um programa bem bacana com 4 convidados, mas antes disso, com o Uli, a gente conversa sobre a franquia como um todo, a visão global do evento e também um tema muito pertinente ao nosso contexto atual, que é a presença do doping nas provas amadoras. O ciclismo cada vez mais disputado nesse tipo de evento tem também trazido uma briga que o Uli comprou muito forte. Ele é um defensor do ciclismo limpo. Você vai ouvir bastante ele falando sobre isso nos próximos minutos. Uma conversa sensacional que começa agora e quem dá boas-vindas para ele é o Nicolas Sessler.
A big pleasure to welcome on board our peloton, Gregários Cycling, Uli Fluhme, one of the creators of Gran Fondo New York, here to talk and speak a little bit about us, about this great event, about the amateur racing scene and how it has been evolving in the past decade. We can say it's quite a recent phenomenon, but has grown a lot, and there is every year more and more enthusiastic and more people joining this, how can you say, Uli, party?
Thanks for having me. I think, what we see in cycling is, my dream is to have in cycling what we see in triathlon and running for decades, that everybody races together. I've been racing triathlon as well. I've done marathons, and I really always enjoyed lining up right behind the fast guys, the elites, the best of the best. And I think that is something that we should achieve also in cycling, not for all races. Paris-Roubaix will always only be for the pro. The Tour de France will always be the 200 guys. But why not have one-day races where the pros are at the front and then the everyday warriors like we are behind you guys, lining up and trying to race against you guys. And I think that's what really is fascinating about many other endurance sports. And I know cycling is very old, but we can get there.
How was the inspiration? Gran Fondo New York was born in Italy, and I think that gives a great pedigree. And then you decided to be the first, I imagine, Gran Fondos in the continental US with Gran Fondo New York Manhattan in 2011. How was that vision? Which were the challenges to do that?
The vision was, for me, simple. I started racing Gran Fondos in Italy in the 90s because I raced most in Germany and Switzerland, where I grew up. And there were very few long-distance road races. Like, I loved that one big loop, lots of mountains, everybody racing against each other, not categories, but really everybody together. And that kind of racing only really existed back then in Italy and in France. In Italy, the Gran Fondo, and in France, the Ciclo Sportif. And in Italy, they were especially competitive, very competitive racing. Basically, if you were not a pro, you were racing the Gran Fondos. So as much as I could, I traveled to Italy, late 90s, early 2000s to race there. And really, grew a passion for Gran Fondo after my, short stint as a professional triathlete as well, doing Ironman. And then through my job as a lawyer, I was sent by my company to New York to work there. And I did not expect the cycling that is possible and how many cyclists there are in New York. There is, however, only either criterium racing or a bike tour, but not long distance mass participation racing like it is a Gran Fondo in Italy. And I met my wife, future wife, now wife, in New York. She was a triathlete, an Ironman triathlete at the time. And I brought her to Italy to show her what a Gran Fondo is like. And she was very enthusiastic about it. She loved it. We came back to New York. We basically quit our job and said, it needs to happen. We need to put on a Gran Fondo in New York. New York needs a race like that. And then the challenges, of course, started with all getting the permission to do it.
Well, I think there is one very important aspect, Uli, that will define and will help you with the understanding of the whole program after it. There's still a concept for Europeans is pretty easy to get, but for other cultures, I guess a little bit in America and in Brazil as well, that it is to differentiate what is a professional cyclist, what is a pro, as we say, what the pros do, the races the pro do, and what is an amateur.
for me, if I go way back when I was young and racing in the early 90s, there was this clear distinction between a professional, and there were very few professionals, and the amateurs, and those were elite amateurs. Even among those elite amateurs, there were pro riders who only raced and they got paid to race. They didn't have a professional license. And then it started to become, continental professional teams took over from what used to be called elite amateurs. So it's never been like really hard line, but more like flowing from one into the other. And I know today there are professional continental pros who are doing other jobs to make a living because they're not getting enough money just from racing. And I know, just like you, elite amateurs that are not working, that are just racing their bikes because they have sponsors, because they can win the big Gran Fondos and they get publicity like that. So how are we just deciding to let people race one or the other because of a license that the UCI gives them or not? And because someone decides to get that license or not? I always say, and I've learned this from running and from triathlon, let everybody race together. Sure, there may be races and there continue to be races that are 100 years old, Liège-Bastogne-Liège, Paris-Roubaix, Tour de France, all of those that are very specific teams, team cars and all of that. You got to be World Tour to get into this race. But I think we need to get away to say a professional is by definition a better athlete than an elite amateur. There is always some overlap at the back. So why do we force this border just by the license if at the end it is sort of artificial? Again, I know professionals that work half the week in a bike shop to make a living. And I know many amateurs who do nothing but ride their bike and race. Why is one allowed to do a Gran Fondo and the other isn't? The license shouldn't make the difference. And I think this is not a problem in Europe or not. I think especially in Europe, there's this very old, this is a professional cyclist. It's been like that for 100 years. It's a very conservative old sport that doesn't like this change. But the change is happening whether they want it. There are these like amateur professionals that don't do anything but race their bike. They get paid by sponsors, by their teams or whatnot, to race the big Gran Fondos, to be on the podium there, to show to the riders who are there what, the products they're representing. So are they pros or are they not? I say, don't care. Everybody at the start line, the gun goes off. We're all the same. We're just people on bikes. We're just racers on bikes.
There was a side effect of this concept of being democratic on everybody can race, which is having an economic incentive or even exposure incentive for amateurs to dope. How did you as a race organizer see this happening over time?
I don't think it's over time. I've seen this in Italy since the 90s, like where Gran Fondo racing has always been this, like, you can't be a pro, you're racing Gran Fondos. They had teams, they were showing up with teams, they had radios. Even back then, they had everything. Of course, they also had the drugs. So this was, for me, this was always there. Why it was so important to me to fight that is that I think that still the vast majority of amateur cyclists, they don't take anything. They do this clean. And there's a lot of riders that train very hard and do everything for our big races. When I put on a Gran Fondo New York, I know that there are guys that train 1 year just for this race. That's their main focus. That's what they put their life on. They have part-time jobs, or even if they have full-time jobs, they spend all the free time they have to train for this. That is their goal. If I don't make sure that I do what I can to give them fair racing conditions, which includes doping control, then I'm making my job bad. I think if I put on a race and say, we have a winner, you get on the podium, you get a prize, you get all the publicity, then I have to make sure that the racing conditions are fair. Otherwise, it's a joke. So either I say, I'm making a bike tour, no timing, you can do what you want, you took your Strava to time the race or whatever, and then you can dope what you want, it doesn't matter. But if I have a podium, if I have a winner, I have to be doing what I can to have anti-doping controls, because we also know that doping is almost never about money. It is always about ego. That includes the top professional cyclists. It may not include a Kenyan runner who, if he wins a marathon, the whole village can live for a year. That is a different story. That might be really just financial. But a professional cyclist, most of them, it's so hard as a sport. They take drugs because they want the ego. They want to win. This is what an athlete has the drive for. That's what we train for, to be the best, to beat the others, not for getting money. Money is important too, but it's too hard to make it for the money.
And for the Gran Fondo New York, this is a voluntary cost of having anti-doping, because US Cycling or UCI don't force you as an amateur race organizer to have. So it's a voluntary decision to have this cost on your structure so that you have more possibilities of a clean race.
For 10 years, we've done this ourselves because they say, we have a limited budget for anti-doping, the USA anti-doping agency, and we focus on professional sports. And I understand that. They need to, if they have very little funds, they need to focus on where actually is the big money. But I think I, as a race organizer, if I see a chance to fund anti-doping program myself, I have to do it. It's just what I owe to myself. We own this company. So if I spend $15,000 per year on anti-doping, that's $15,000 that I can spend on my family to do a luxury vacation somewhere. It's literally out of my pocket to do that. But this is important to me, which is why we do that. This year was the first time that USADA, the USA anti-doping, said, this is an important race. We're actually coming on our budget to do it. So in the past, we always paid that. This year was the first time that they did the controls for us. Not sure what's happening in the future, but in general, this is not something anti-doping does. I know in Italy, the Italian anti-doping goes a lot to amateur races. The French anti-doping does it sometimes, but this is unique in the world. I don't think in many other countries it's done.
But Uli, as an organizer, how many people will you think is the same fight with you on this business?
Almost no one. Unfortunately, almost no one. We have small events as well, where we have 300, 400 riders. And you heard the cost earlier. I can't test at a race. I can't spend $10,000 on anti-doping with an overall race budget of $40,000. So we're not perfect either. There are races where we just can't do it. We hope that the national anti-doping is coming. But there are large events, very large events, who just don't do it. I think there are two reasons. One, they're too cheap to do it. They are saying, why should we spend the money on that? Who cares? Or they say, we don't want that anyone gets tested positive. It gives a bad image for our race. So you have these two problems. When we started doing these anti-doping controls, and we even did it before the race, we went to people's homes to test them there. I was hoping that our initiative will show others that it's possible and that we can do it. But I've only mostly ran into blocks. I've gone to other races. I said, a month before New York is a big local race, 2 hours from New York. I said, we come to your race on our money. We're testing because we know you have 10 riders that are good at our race too. We can test them there. We don't have to go to their homes. They're all there at this place. We can test them cheaper. The organizer said, no, I don't want you there. Stay away. So we still see that a lot. And it's frustrating, but if I can't change the world, I at least can try the best that I can do to keep our GFNY races as clean as possible.
That's one point. People are usually afraid of bringing a bad image or not, because I think actually it's the opposite. You solve a problem, but people are afraid of opening the Pandora box and go looking after it. Because as you said, if you test on the race, it's very rare that someone in 2022 will be as stupid to come into your race doped. Let's be honest. So you got to look for other conditions. And as you mentioned, people who are not really used to it don't know, but UCI in the professional cycling world, you as an organizer, you know who the dopers are. You just need to catch them off guard. That's the big point. So learning how to catch them is it's also something important. And my question is, have you, in the history of Gran Fondo New York, Uli, have you ever had a problem that you had a guy to say, man, I really need to find a way to take this guy out of my event because I know he's doing something. I know he's cheating. I know he's screwing over the others, but I just cannot prove it.
Yes, and that continues to exist. And my hands are tied in a way. When I have a case where, say, there is a process starting, or like you had it, a Brazilian where he escapes anti-doping, and that's a month before my race, that person cannot race GFNY. He was on the start list for our races. A person like that is not going to start. Even if he's not sanctioned by the agency yet, at that point, I'm saying that, you're not coming, you're not invited. You cannot come to the race. Over the years, we have a lot of riders that I am suspicious of, but just out of my suspicion, I have to be fair at the same time. I can't say, I don't trust you. You can't come. What I can do is I say, many of these better riders want a free invitation or something, and I say no. If you want to do the race, you pay your entry fee like everybody else, and that gets rid of some of those dopers as well because they get invitations at other races.
So we need to believe on anti-doping tests, right? Because it's the only way to avoid this or to make these people out of the race?
I think you catch very few people. At the end of the day, we got to be honest, we're missing most people that dope. But I think if the organizations would work together better, if they would agree to do more, then we had a better chance. And I also know that, there's a lot of, in science, a lot of work on cheaper tests that are now up to $1,000 per test. If you do EPO and everything, that will come down to $50, maybe $100. Tests that are, can detect drugs longer term, not just for a day or 2 or 3 or 5, but over weeks. And I think that's where we need to get to, that we say the doper will always be ahead of the anti-doping, but we can close the circle. And what I see also is that, we said earlier that we're not catching people as we could maybe. They are avoiding getting caught at the race, but at least they know they're getting tested. So they can't shoot the EPO the day before. They can't take the amphetamine in the race. At least they have to stop. They have to do microdosing, which is not as successful, as effective as if you would take whatever you want. So I think if we would have a better net of testing and more organizations, the big organizations, working on it, working together, we'd had a better chance. It's a fight that we will never win, but it is a fight that we have to lead. Because if we stop leading it, and if we allow doping, then we start seeing people dying more. In races, we have to be ready for people dropping dead in a race. If you allow doping free for all, you can take whatever you want. We have to be fine as a society that we see people just fall off their bikes, drop dead on a soccer field, die at night in their sleep. That is just something, there's many people say, why don't you just allow it? And I think, I have 3 little boys and they love sports, and I want them to be able to do sports, competitive sports at some point without the need or seeing like, if I want to compete against anyone, I have to take drugs. To be able to compete, even if it's not about winning, to just be able to compete without drugs. I think that for me is a big goal.
Yeah. I mean, when I speak to former pros and people, especially in Spain and France, where I'm living at, that they have lived through the late 90s, 2000, which is a generation I see a lot. And plenty of people who are now working in sport just in general as mechanics, as directors, as soigneurs or things like that. They say, yeah, Nico, but at my years, 2000s, it was not even possible to come close to becoming, making a living out of it if you were not accepting it. And today, no, maybe there are still a few ones, and it has gone a long way on the anti-doping fight to make sure that at least you can be a professional cyclist or be at such a big event as Gran Fondo and compete totally and 100% clean. And we have plenty of examples, which I myself, as a professional cyclist, it's a question I make myself plenty of times when I see a race. It's like, damn, what am I doing here? But in the end, when I train with friends and I see what they're doing, they say, man, you can be just as good competing at the highest level, 100% clean. And that gives a lot of inspiration. But that being said, in the end of the day, if you as an organizer have this so-called problem of having dopers in your race, it's also a good problem. It means you have been doing something good and that your race has grown to such prestige that people want to dope to win your race. How do you see this other point, growing the event at such a level and having such a prestige that people deeply want to grow, to dope to win your event?
We've tested since the second year of our race. And in the 2012, we already caught 3 guys out of the 8 we tested, 2 of them with EPO. So I think if you start there, how much worse can it get, right? So I think just from knowing a lot and having raced in Italy in the 90s in Gran Fondo, I never had any illusions. So I don't think we've ever been at a point as a race where we had a clean race, completely clean race. So yes, the more competitive it gets, the more doping there will also be. But it's always been competitive. There's always been doping. I don't, it's not that big of a disadvantage for us to grow. It's always been there, and you just have to stay on it.
But also understanding the business model that you have. where does the core comes from? Obviously, I understand that it comes way more from 98%, 99% of the participants who want to enjoy a great experience of being together with people who are really good and really fast on their bikes, but they are not looking at doping. Like those 99%, the core people who come to Gran Fondo New York. Do you manage to have both motivated to come to the race at the same side, like the family guy who trains, wants a challenge in his life, at the same time that you have the guy who aims, like you said, for his ego, for his narcissism, and to say that he is the champion of this race?
I think here you are the typical example of a cyclist that has the cycling hat on. You would never get that question if to an organizer who organizes the New York City Marathon or the Berlin Marathon or the Ironman Hawaii. Everybody knows there's pros and everybody else together. That is for me the normality. Cycling is, why in our head do we separate the amateurs, the people who do it aside their job, and the professionals? You need to remove this from your head completely. We're all just people, athletes who race. I know that people who work 50 days a week and have a family, they still want to do their best. They're racing. It may take them 5 instead of 4 hours like you, or 6 instead of 4, or even 8 hours. But they're doing their best on that day. They race. Most of our people, and that's our concept, they race. They may be half as fast as you, but they race. Speed is very relative. Fitness is very relative. But I think, giving the maximum in relation to your personal fitness, that's what racing is. In cycling, we built these categories. Every country has amateur categories. I don't know why. Why don't we throw everybody together, like in a marathon, like in an Ironman, and say, gun goes off, start race, and everybody races together. And that's something that I really enjoy a lot about these mass participation events, because I never care to win my category 2 race. I always look at the category 1 in the pros. I'd rather be last in a pro race. I've done open pro races as an amateur. And on the same weekend, I had an amateur race where I could have won. I was always going to the open pro race where I got my ass kicked all day long and finished way in the back. But I wanted to compete with the best. And I want to give everybody that chance to just be that and not a relative winner. So you need to take your cycling hat off and think about marathon running. How is that different? I understand in pro cycling, the teams, the team cars, the strategy, all of that. I'm not taking this away. Pro races will always be singular for 100, 200 people. Those will always exist. But why don't we take the big events that exist already and put pros at the front and let them race by themselves together with the fans, because they're already there. I think it's a missed opportunity also for the industry to say, you race the fans. Our New York winner, he won 3 times, is a New Yorker, Mike Marguerite. He's a banker from New York. He's a very strong cyclist. And he's better known in New York as a cyclist than maybe Lance Armstrong is more known, maybe George Hincapie because he's American. But on number 3, it's Mike Marguerite, because he has 5,000 riders in the field that are losing against him and looking later, how did he do that? They can compare to him. They can't compare to you or whatever else the guys are doing at the tour. So I think just think about that, everybody together, and then you don't have to separate things. And if someone wants still to go easy and not race, they can go easy. That's then their decision. I think they're wasting their race. I think if you get a race, you should race. You want to go easy with friends, go easy with friends on a different day. But on race day, do your best. I think a race deserves that. I think a big race that you train for deserves that you give your best.
Uli, on a race that I think we all agree there's a minority that use doping substances to race. Yes. And I felt this myself. I used to do amateur racing, and then I just decided to go to the races just for experience, not trying to compete, because I'm saying, maybe somebody that I'm competing against is making choices that I will never make about doping. It's a negative incentive for me to train harder, to go to the race, because that podium is no longer on my reach, especially on races that I do that have no anti-doping control. So it's absolutely
for sure.
Unregulated. Is there any solution to this other than what you are doing in Manhattan of having anti-doping controls?
Do you see any?
The only option I see is the very traditional, like the Paris-Roubaix Grand Fondo, where there's no podium at all. There's only, as a marathon, a finisher medal.
Yeah, but
so there's no incentive to race.
But that's a bike tour. That is not a bike race. That's the bike tour. And I have nothing against the bike tour. If I want to do a bike tour, we call it a French start. You start between 6 and 8 o'clock whenever you want. You go with your friends. You have 8 stations. Those exist as well, and they have their place. But it's not a race. I mean, we also have to keep in mind that there are a lot of people that just don't have the talent to be a professional cyclist, but they have the mindset. They want to race. They want to be at the front. They want to have some event, some race they can train for and be good at. A lot of the guys that are good at the Grand Fondos just don't have the talent of a pro, but they live like pros. They eat, train, sleep like pros. Some of them even more extreme. I know absolutely crazy guys. I know some pros, they would never weigh their salad, but those guys, they're weighing their salad, they eat. They sleep at least 10 hours a night, a 2-hour nap in the afternoon, all these things. And why shouldn't we give them also races? Why should we say, no, you don't have the talent, you can't do it? So I don't think that's the solution. I think to just say, okay, there are people doping, so we don't have a competition. I think it's not satisfactory. I think it's giving up. It's cynical, and then we give up, and then we just say, well, you're not a pro cyclist. Take your bike and ride easy around. I personally don't like bike tours. I ride my bike as often I can, but I don't have to go to a place to line up and ride with other people and pay money for that. Then I can just ride myself.
Getting on lighter subjects, you are seeing the demographics of the races of Grand Fondo New York across the globe changing, because typically they were 30 plus male riders, the majority of the participants. Do you see this changing?
It's an ebb and flow, and it depends on where. Like it's super interesting. Like, for example, something for you as for us, very exotic would be Indonesia. If we're holding races in Indonesia with 2,000 riders, and there's a lot of people in their 20s, young women, 22, 23, they're Muslims, so they're even riding in their outfits that they have to wear, long sleeve in the heat, in the tropical heat, very young people in Asia. So we see a lot of young there. Slowly, we see in the US also younger people. There's almost a gap that the millennials are the ones that are not racing. So they're now late 20s to late 30s is like their road cycling in the US we don't see as popular. So it's the old guys like me, 45 and older, that do it. But we're seeing now younger people go in. In Europe, it's still very old guys, still very few women. While in the US, we have like 20% women. In Asia, we have 30% women. In Latin America, we see a lot of women. Like in Colombia, we see, in Mexico, we see a lot of 20-something-year-old, 30-year-old women. It's very fashionable to be a cyclist. They dress up for it. They have a lot of fun with it. So that's great to see. Like, I think globalization really works also in cycling and will help this old European crust structure to break it up and show them that there's so much more, that all this, what happens outside Europe, there's a lot happening. If you forget all of the cycling in Europe, there's so much happening around the world as well. And you know that in Brazil, what's happening. And in Europeans are very like, oh, I don't care. Like, Italy and France and Belgium, we're cycling. And what are they doing? They're omitting a lot of things that are amazing. We love seeing our international races.
Uli, I was fascinated when I heard about the 2011, the first Manhattan edition. And curious to go to New York because I've been there as a tourist. And I said, yes. How they're going to do a Grand Fondo in New York? It's like Broadway and 2nd Avenue in
we tried.
But then the George Washington Bridge, and many of my friends that went there said, listen, don't take a van to the start. Bike your bike on slow New York on a Sunday morning is unique experience that you're not going to experience. Stay in Midtown at your hotel, then go from your bike to George Washington Bridge, warm up and enjoy empty New York. My question is, how do you guys design the route on starting on George Washington Bridge and going upstate in Jersey, in Vermont?
Well, if it's a Grand Fondo in New York, it has to be from Manhattan. And there's 2 ways to get from Manhattan on that side of the island. And that's the Lincoln Tunnel or the George Washington Bridge. The Lincoln Tunnel is a dark tunnel and is not a nice start of a race. So we said we want to leave over the George Washington Bridge. So we tried to start in Midtown, north of Central Park. We had several locations that we proposed to the police. Everything was declined. Even the George Washington Bridge said, no, you're not going to do this. But it was the persistence of my wife who put it on with me together to just not say, accept the no. She kept calling and said, but we want to do it, but we want to do it. And they said, no. But ultimately, they were like, well, she's not going away. So we give her a number of costs that it will be, and that will go her way. So they said, well, it's going to cost you $100,000 to close down George Washington Bridge lower level, which is the busiest bridge in the world. She said, yes, we're going to pay that. We're going to do it. And that was the first race. And, the route from there is fairly straightforward because that route that we take is the one cycling route that everybody in New York takes. There is not many options. It's a big city. Long Island is too crowded. New Jersey to the south is too crowded. So everybody follows that side of the Hudson River in the training and going through these towns and Dubai Mountains. So this is the classic New York cycling route that everybody takes. There is no other option. So once we had George Washington Bridge, we had to talk to all the towns and parks along the road to get the approval, which was very difficult. A lot of obstacles on the way for the first years. But now, that we've held it 10 times, it's settled as the race course that people know.
I can tell you that whoever had the opportunity on be at the start on George Washington Bridge on the early hours of the day, it's hard to describe. It gets me emotional to this day. I've been there 3 times. It's absolutely unique.
It is, yes.
And being here with you, Uli, I heard about you a lot. I have been at your races, but learning more about you, about your history, about your points of view makes me a bigger fan, not only of the entrepreneur, but also as the cyclist. I think your logic about not counting on the exception, and here I'm famous for the digressions. There was an Austrian bank that there was a policy on reimbursement of expenses of T&Es, that most of the companies have a bureaucratic and slow process to reimburse their employees because they're trying to catch the cheaters. So it takes a lot of money, it takes a lot of effort. The policy this bank adopted was that every reimbursement is going to happen the same day, but 3 to 5% of the reimbursements are going to be audited to the detail. So you took a taxi 2 p.m. on 24th Street and went to the Central Park. So the audit is going to be there. Any divergence is going to be firing without a cause. So I think the same mindset that you have, instead of focusing on the exception, they focus on the group because 90% of the people don't cheat on their expense reports. So you're having a huge structure and you're damaging and you're punishing the 90% that doesn't cheat because of 10%. So let's focus on those 10% and make a zero tolerance on it became much more efficient, much more cost efficient and fair to the whole organization. Yeah. And I think the mindset I'm hearing for you is exactly the same way of thinking.
And we have it easier, of course, than a professional race with 200 riders where it's all about winning. If you take away, we had in 2015, our winner was caught for EPO later. So we had him on the video crossing the finish line like that. And a month later, we had to disqualify him and it was a fraud. And the second guy was the new winner and so forth. But it doesn't really matter because we still have all the other finishers who had a great day out there. If that happens to the Tour de France, the whole year was nothing, basically. I'm focusing on the 90%. But if I put on a race, I still have to give those who are at the top 10% all the possibilities to have a fair race. I can't just let it go and say, whatever, like others do. We're looking away, so nothing happens. That is discouraging people to use these events to train for them. And I wish not that the organizers would do more to do this, but I also wish the riders would ask the organizations to do more, would go away and say, no, I'm not going to race here because you're not doing anything. I train very hard. I race for these races. I'm not picking your race because you're not doing anything for this race. I'm going to the races that actually do some anti-doping. Or there's this guy, there is now the rumor that he fled anti-doping. I'm going to be loud about it. It's like, why does he still race? Why do you take a selfie with him? Why do you positive comment on his Instagram? People need to step up. If they don't step up, at some point we get to the point, maybe that says, we don't care. Let's just get rid of anti-doping and everybody can dope. But people don't follow through with the consequences to know that as soon as we allow doping, the health consequences for our society are going to be incredibly damaging. We have to be ready for people dying and be disabilities left and right.
I would jump the queue here on Leandro and Alvaro, but to put a point, is that not the first reason why pros, like myself, we don't like going to Gran Fondos because we're going to get our asses ripped apart by some random guys who are really good, but we're going to be ashamed of it.
Yeah, I believe that.
And the reality is, if we go to those events, we're going to get thrown over. And some random guy, let's say, people who never heard, will beat us.
But we've had pros. We have had world pros race at our races, race hard, not just show up as guests. I think it's an opportunity. They get beaten. It raises questions. How is this guy beating them? How is he not a pro? I think it's good. It puts a mirror in the face of people because people don't understand it. Many riders, they don't want to know. They're still, when I see people like Contador being handed around at events as a celebrity and all the normal riders taking selfies with them, I don't understand that. I don't follow that. At that point, I'm losing my hope into anti-doping. So if no one cares to have, why this guy gets invited, no one stands up and says, what does he do here? I'm all for second chances. Give a person a second chance. Give a person a second chance in life, but not in sports. You cheat once, you're out. We come back to the banks. If you're a banker, you're stealing as a cashier $1,000, you will never get a job as a cashier again. Never. You can open a cafe somewhere or a bar or do whatever you want, but a bank will never hire you again. Why should we allow a doper to come back? You have one chance to race clean. You spoil that chance, you're gone, out, lifetime, out. Do something else. You open a bar. I can go to your bar. Why not? I can support you, or, everybody makes mistakes in life, and I'm fine with that. But competition is not a right. It's something that you're given, that you're allowed to do, to be part of. And if you don't respect the rules, you should be out.
Uli, getting back to the point of the stakeholders and doping, I think one key stakeholder as a group is the sponsors. That maybe the sponsors start demanding to the race organizers that there is anti-doping because they are the biggest leverage, saying, I'm not going to sponsor an event that doesn't have anti-doping. So I'm a true believer that this movement of making sponsors conscious that they have a responsibility, they have a leverage on making this happen. And an amateur event that doesn't have anti-doping is not going to get their money, regardless of how much audience it has or relevance. Because as you said, by not having anti-doping, indirectly, he may be causing people to damage their health and die on the event and have a lot of consequences.
And how do you feel about this, Uli? The brands, the sponsors, how much they are connected to anti-doping rules or a clean sport?
It depends. Campagnolo was our title sponsor for 6 years. A great company. I love Campagnolo. My bikes are always Campagnolo. It's just something I'm really passionate about, this company. But of course, they're also sponsoring teams where there were dopers. So there is always this, it's very hard to stay completely away from it. But in 2018, they wanted an advertisement in our magazine with Alejandro Valverde. We all know that he was involved in Operación Puerto. And I said to the marketing guy, I'm not going to print that. Alejandro Valverde is not going to be in my magazine. And that marketing guy had so much of an ego that the sponsorship ended right there because I did not abide to him this. I still respect Campagnolo as a company. And I think the boss of the company, he didn't know about this. It was really just this person whose ego did not allow that I said no to him. But that's how far it goes. That's how much money we as an event are losing. They were a title sponsor. They're paying us very well because I'm anti-doping. And I want to be able to say no to an Alejandro Valverde in my magazine. I'm anti-doping everything. And then I have to put a picture of them. No, they can. Campagnolo has many other options, but his ego, it had to be this guy. And that's the marketing campaign. And I said no, and he didn't like that. And that is just a company we work with. There are a lot of companies that don't even touch us because I'm anti-doping. So instead of doing the positive, I go to you because you're anti-doping. I'm a toxic person because I'm very outspoken about it. They're always thinking, and the implications here and there. I think business at the end of the day is very much like that. There's a lot of lip service. There's a lot of things being said. And if someone gets caught, we had an agreement. And if someone gets caught, we're stepping away. It's insincere. It's insincere to be a professional cycling sponsor and put in the agreement if there are 2 doping cases, the company goes away. When they know if you go into professional cycling, that's what you go into. Then don't do these clauses. Stand for it, know the risk, know that most of them are doping, fine. Which is why I think amateur events like ours are much better. We have the audience, our people are riding themselves. And when someone dopes, it's just one of 5,000 riders. It doesn't matter. It doesn't anything to the image of the sponsor.
Uli, we can continue here for hours, and sincerely, I hope that you accept invitation to come back.
I'd love to. I talk a lot, I'm sorry.
We all talk a lot, and we all enjoy, and I think we all share the same beliefs, which makes this conversation great. Mention about doping, we just read and made a program about the book on Jan Urik, The Best It Never Was. And I think it goes to the cynicism of Deutsche Telekom, and everybody that was around and said, no, there's nothing happening. Everything is okay.
100%. 100%. I agree. It's incredible to see that. And the television that then quits, reporting from the tour because now someone was positive. Like you can't even start to begin. It's incredible. I mean, I'm German born. I grew up with Ulrich in those days. I saw it immediately that this guy is not clean. And, many people say he would have been still a top rider without the drugs. We don't know that. We know how powerful EPO is and that some people respond better to others, to drugs than others. We don't know that. We know that Armstrong started doping as a teenager. What if he never doped? He might have been never even an elite amateur cyclist. So if we just have the hope to say, well, it's still the same guys at the front, I think we're wrong. Responding to drugs is a big deal. I know it's a big enough deal for the top teams to recruit riders that get tested for how low is your hematocrit natural. So if we give you EPO, how much can you take before you trip the wires, basically, or is healthy still for you? It's a big part of recruiting a cyclist, how that cyclist responds to drugs. So the cynicism in this and all the virtue signaling is incredible.
When I ask you about to believe on anti-doping tests, is this why? Because we have a line. We have to believe or we can't enjoy the cycling, right? How do you watch professional cycling? How do you enjoy a Henko or Pogacar or someone doing incredible rides? And how do you believe on it?
In general or me personally?
You personally, for sure.
I don't. I started watching pro cycling when I was 8 years old with my dad in the 80s, the Tour de France. And, I started racing as an amateur in 91. And pretty quickly I saw what's going on. By 93, I was an 18-year-old cyclist. I knew what's going on. And since then, I have not watched pro cycling and believed in anyone. And it's been very hard on me because I love the sport. I really love the sport. I still follow it. And because I love the sport, I fight so much for it. And I can't watch it anymore. I may watch it. I shut it off before the finish. I watch it because I love Tour de France. I know all the mountains. I've climbed them all. I love the landscape. I love still the tactics around the race. I love the team cars. All of that comes with pro cycling. I love. So I watch it, but the results for me are it's not real. It's just a show. So I have no emotions for this. And I'm feeling sad for younger people that possibly don't understand that and will understand it later and look back over the years when they were fans and were cheering and realize it was no different than, the American wrestling or something like that. Just a show.
Like a telecatch.
Yeah.
Or an X-Men movie.
Wrestling. That's for sure. When you see that reality, I can say from personal experience, and you get there and you understand that you're just part of a circus, it is quite frustrating, right? And I see that frustration that I had the same, and the guys know there was some years I was pretty close to depression because you realize and you see that much of it is fake. We are there to put on a show. On the other hand, I still see a way, as you said, a show, a way of making a living out of my passion and not needing to do it. Okay, maybe to be the best, or I wouldn't say be the best because that's for me not being the best, but to win the event, I don't fool myself. I know that's not normal.
I'm very happy that I never had to be in your position because I was never good enough to be a pro cyclist. I was a pro triathlete, but even then I didn't need to win to make money. I was working. It must be terrible. I've spoken to many pros in your situation, and I think you have a good mindset that you say, I live for the experience. I want to be in 10 years, look back and say, I've tried it, I've lived it, I've been part of this. As I say, I still love the sport, the traveling, the racing, the atmosphere around the race, all of the team stuff, the team kit, the bikes, all of this is fascinating. And if you're able to use this in your life and this experience is something positive, I think it's great. It's unfortunate that it has to be just that you cannot dream to win in a realistic way. But I think if you can do that, and I've seen other pros be able to do that, it's great. And I think you have to. And the depression, I get it. I've seen a lot of guys.
Yeah. I mean, I came to a point that I realized that I can still making a living, getting money, and enjoy all this other part of cycling, beautiful. But it's true that it took a lot of my winning drive. I now take part in the events. I put on a show. I know what I'm going to do. But I no longer have that illusion that one day I might win a Tour de France or that. I know it's not going to happen. And if it does happen, don't believe it. That's what I tell people.
I'm not in a risk.
But you can still, you can still enjoy and that I truly believe, Uli, that in pro cycling of today, 98% of the peloton is racing clean. I can tell you that. You have that 2%. Because the mentality has changed, and I see that on friends around when I see them winning. But when it comes to the big events, you say, man, how is possible this guy is that strong? And come to the big events, he looks like, ridiculous. But you gotta find your way, and it's still possible to live from it, enjoy all the nice hype, the nice things of it, but you gotta find your own motivation, that intrinsic thing that keeps you going and makes you still work.
I don't think it's, I'm not in your position, but personally, we disagree. I think the number is much higher of the dopers. At the end, the result is the same. The result.
I would be happy. It would make me better.
You just have to look at speeds and climb times and stuff like that, not just of the top guys, but of the whole field, not like average speeds. Average speeds are no number that you look at, but climb times, very, very much is physical. You look like a healthy person. If I look at other pros, you don't look enough like this. You don't look enough like a skeleton and your skin like paper thin. And I see a lot of that. Among pro cyclists, more than 3%. But at the end, you're right. Like whether it's 3% or 30%, for you personally, you found a way, and I think that's great.
Uli, we have been here for almost 3 years, and I'm sincere. This is one of the best shows that we recorded. I'm honored to be aware on the Western part of the world, on the 20th and 21st century. You are a key person that represents what I personally believe on making the intersection between loving the sport and making a business of it. Being true to your principles, to your beliefs. It's an honor to meet you.
Thanks
it's an honor to have you at Gregário. And I think you have a place in history at changing the amateur cycling for good in the 21st century.
Yeah, let's hope that, we can grow this from what we do and that others follow what we do. And that we get more of pro cycling to come into our events, to become more like marathons that are big festivals of all the athletes together. Because cycling is such an amazing sport. And it deserves all of that and more. I owe cycling so much in my life. It's taught me so many things. And I was finally able to put my passion also together with the work that I do and don't have to do what I used to do. Thanks for having me. And, Brazil, it's always been great to be there. I loved our race there. I'm glad we're back with a race. And I hope to see many of the Brazilians next year in New York.